The Mysterious Legend of Vladimir, Book 1. The year was 1427, and Nadia, the Empress of Romania, fled her war-torn countryside and headed into the Transylvanian Alps, taking with her only a handful of her rogue warriors, along with her trusted physician, Phaedra. The raging storm and deep snow was difficult to travel in, especially for Nadia. She was in the last stage of pregnancy, and the baby moved constantly. By the time they made it to the other side of the Alps, her baby was coming. They barely made it to Castle Vlad, where Phaedra helped deliver the beautiful baby boy. As Nadia held out her hands for her son, Phaedra clung to the baby and said, "I shall give him to you only if you free me. My love is waiting for me just on the other side of Ploiești." Furious, Nadia shouted, "Give me my son, and I shall grant you your demands, but only if you stay with me for 3 days until I'm stronger." After Phaedra agreed, she handed the Empress her son. She looked down at him. She said, "My beautiful child, I shall name you after the castle in which you were born. Your name will be Vladimir Dracula the Great. You, my son, will be a great warrior and feared by all." The Empress handed Phaedra the baby and said, "Bring Vladimir back to me in 3 days. By then I will be healed, and my warriors will lead you safely to your love." "Thank you, my Empress. I will never forget what you have done for me." 3 days later, Phaedra returned with young Vladimir. When she handed the Empress her son, the Empress ordered her guards to seize Phaedra. She said, "Take this gypsy out to the forest, drain the blood from her throat, then throw her into the Moldavia River." Before the guards could haul her away, Phaedra shouted, "I curse your son! On the night he shall wed, he himself will drain the blood from his wife's throat. From that moment on, he will no longer walk the earth when the sun is high. He will only feed from the throats of his victims, and that, my Empress, is how he will be feared." Nadia laughed as her guards hauled Phaedra away. 1452. Lying in the tall grass, Vladimir gazed into Victoria's dark brown eyes. Leaning over, he brushed her long, curly black hair behind her ear and whispered, "My love, as our waiting day nears, I have a strange sensation running throughout my body. It is as if my senses have been heightened. I can smell things I have never smelled before. I can hear from miles away, and I can see in the dark as if it were day." Victoria smiled and said, "Oh, my love, it is just an illusion. Our love has overwhelmed your senses." He pulled her to his hard body with such speed that it was a blur. Devouring her mouth, he took small bites of her lips and tongue. Slowly he moved down to her throat. Lingering, he could feel the blood pulsating through her vein. The urge was strong to sink his teeth into her throat and drain her of her blood, but when he heard Victoria mutter his name, it was as if the thought had never occurred. Vladimir made his way back to her mouth. As his kiss burned with passion, it consumed her memory of his unhuman speed. Victoria melted into his strong arms. She ran her fingers through his long black hair. She muttered, "I love you, Vladimir." Swiftly he rolled her over on top of him. Pressing his lips hard against her, he muttered, "I love you." Pulling back, she could see that his brown eyes were much darker and more dangerous looking than she had ever seen before. Yet she was not afraid. As the weeks went by and their wedding day approached, Vladimir's anxious tendencies intensified. He was no longer the gentle, kind, patient man that everyone had known and loved. Slowly he was becoming a rogue. His tendencies were vicious and short-fused. But what terrified him more than anything were the times he would retreat from the forest without any memory of how the blood of an unknown victim got on his hands and mouth. Concerned, Nadia came to her son on the night before he was to take his bride, and said, "My sweet Vladimir, what has become of you? I know not the man I look upon. He has changed right before my eyes. My darling son, I wish there was something I could do to ease your pain." He fell to his mother's feet and wept. "I feel and see the changes that are growing inside of me, yet I'm unable to fight this overwhelming urge. Mother, I feel the need to devour everyone that stands before me, even my sweet Victoria. But my need will not allow me to flee. It is like my destiny has been chosen for me, and I have no control of it. What am I to do, Mother? Please tell me." Nadia stumbled back, as if the wind was knocked out of her. She knew that the curse that was placed on her son was about to come to fruition. The only way to stop it was to kill Vladimir. And that was not an option. With tears in her eyes, she said, "My son, you were right. Your destiny has been chosen, but what you do with it is up to you." Vladimir looked at his mother and said, "What is it that I'm to do?" It is told that on the night that you take Victoria to your bedchamber, you will drain the blood from her throat. Vladimir, you are a strong man. You must fight the feeling that grows inside you. Otherwise, poor Victoria will die, and you, my son, would live with a cursed soul for eternity." Shocked, Vladimir held his mother's hand and said, "You are right. I am strong, and I will fight. I will fight just like Nicola has taught me." Nadia smiled and said, "I know you will, my son." Her smile faded as he left the room, fearing that the curse was stronger. Vladimir awoke in a cold sweat, remembering the vivid nightmare, the nightmare that his mother had told him. Climbing out of bed, he went to the window. The sun had just peeked over the mountain. The sky was a brilliant blue, and the birds sang a soft melody. Vladimir refused to dwell on the nightmare that had plagued his sleep, because today Victoria would be his bride. He knew his love for her could overcome the curse that his mother said was placed on him. Time flew by with friends and family checking in on him, making sure he had the ring and that his clothes were just right. What he remembered the most was the encouraging words from his mother. She said, "You are strong, my son, and no matter what happens, I love you." On the way down to the cathedral, Vladimir's stomach was tied in knots. His heart told him he could conquer all, but his senses had him fearing his very existence. Standing in the large cathedral, he watched his beautiful Victoria walk toward him. At that moment, he knew he could never hurt her. He put the curse out of his mind completely. Vladimir took Victoria's hand and vowed with joy and happiness to love her for eternity. The ballroom was alive with laughter as Vladimir and Victoria greeted friends and family. Throughout the evening they ate food, drank wine, and danced to the melody of a violin and harp. When the large bell rang its midnight chime, the doors that led in and out of the ballroom slammed shut. The guests screamed for their lives as Vladimir's eyes became black as coal, and his rage spun out of control. His mother stood out on the veranda and watched helplessly as her son slowly drained the blood from the throats of everyone who were now trapped in the large ballroom, with the exception of his beloved wife. Somehow she had escaped and was now running throughout the winding maze of corridors of Vlad Castle. With the blood of his guests now flowing through his veins, Vladimir's senses were heightened 100 times more than he had experienced throughout the months prior to the wedding. When he touched the banister, he could feel the deep grain of the wood. The sound of the bubbling creek outside the castle walls reached his ears. The corridor that he walked down was as black as midnight, yet he could see this black spider that hung in its web, high up in the corner. The smells that flooded his nostrils were confusing, with the exception of the sweet feminine smell of Victoria. Terrified, Victoria hid in a dark, empty room. It was as far away from the ballroom as she could possibly find without getting lost. Her mind was ravaged with the image of Vladimir looking up at her after he had drained the blood from her friends' throats. His eyes were like nothing she had ever seen before, black, cold, and dangerous. She desperately prayed that he would give up looking for her, and that at first light she would flee for help. Her heart nearly stopped when she heard his taunting laugh. Then Vladimir said, "My sweet Victoria, you can't hide from me. I can hear your blood pulsating through your veins, and your rapid heart is fluttering as fast as a hummingbird's wings." Trying to block out his laughter, she silently sat in the far dark corner, her knees drawn to her chest. Hands over her ears, she laid her head down onto her legs, and silently she prayed that this nightmare would go away. "We're damned, Victoria, so your prayers will go unheard. I know where you are." She knew it was a lie. How could he know? His taunting continued until her mind was so ravaged by fear that she could no longer think. By the time the door blew open, she was curled up in a ball lying on the cold, damp floor. The moment Vladimir saw his beautiful Victoria lying on the floor, he ran to her. His emotions were overwhelmed. He wanted to protect her, yet he craved to feel her, to taste her, to be with her. Swooping her up into his arms, he carried her to their bedchamber. After laying her on the bed, Vladimir brushed her hair back from her face, revealing her red, soft lips. With intentional slowness, he leaned down and fed on her mouth. Slowly, he worked his way down to her throat. Vladimir's body shuddered with excitement the moment he felt the blood pulsating through Victoria's vein. With passion, he sank his long, sharp teeth into her throat, sipping her warm, sweet blood. Her eyes fluttered open, muttering his name. They shared the same mind-shattering passion until the last drop of blood was drained from her delicate body. Vladimir laid his head on Victoria's cold, pale chest, surrendering to the day sleep that now consumed his way of life.